First, I have to apologize. In contrast to the other speakers, I'm no native English speaker, so please apologize all that shortcomings in my language, but I'll do my best. First, I would like to underline all what has been said by Bernard, especially about the development of this institute, which for me is also amazing. Same as you, I'm always also coming here since 3 years, and what we see every year, it's almost like that. And I worked on various contemporary pieces here the last days, and it was also amazing, not the development of the ability of the young people, but also the engagement of the people, which is quite different if I compare it with the beginning. So this is very sensational. The second thing is, Bernard was speaking so harmoniously about the connecting together here in that region, and in a way there are always obstacles, we know that, but in a way this is in fact something which is amazing. Also, what it was interesting for me, because I will mainly speak about Indonesian things, that in all your comments it was always Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Singapore, sorry I forgot that. But Indonesia in a way plays a special role in the region, and this is quite interesting for me. The other thing which bothers me after listening to your talk before is I'm coming from a country or from a region which maybe for some people was thought as a model for connecting the voices, but at the moment just does the difference in Europe. I don't know how much you follow the development in Europe, but the rise of right-wing movements in Europe, especially also in my country, in Germany, is really frightening, I must say. And I'm really looking forward to the future, how we can manage that, to bring things again together, because at the moment it goes in another direction. And it goes in another direction because of reasons which I feel very sad about. Because it goes in another direction just because of fugitives. And especially in Germany, where East Germany had been united with West Germany 20 years ago, I thought that these people must know much better about what it means to be in an authoritarian country and then receive democracy. So this is a very strange development currently in Europe, and I don't want to bother you with that, but it's something which I think it should also be a topic here in this region, how we change currently in Europe and hopefully don't change too much. I was asked by the organizers to give a paper in a slightly different direction. You could say that how did the region here influence the cultural and musical development in Europe? And I think that's a very interesting topic. And as I said, I'm a specialist for Indonesia. You might accept if I only use Indonesian examples, because that's the region I'm familiar with. And seen from another point of view, there's in fact the strongest influence, as far as I know, on Western music coming from the gamelan tradition in Indonesia. And as you see in my topic, there are also two words which I have to explain a little in the beginning: world music or Weltmusik. So those people who are familiar with German language, they may wonder what the difference is, because Weltmusik is, if you want, the literal translation of world music. But apparently that term means something different in Germany. So world music, what I know from the English-speaking world, is all musics of the world. Like I remember at UCLA in California in the 60s, they founded a world music department, Mantelhood and KM Wasito-Diningrat, and you could learn Japanese music, Balinese music, and so on. In my university in Germany, there's a professor for jazz, popular music, and Weltmusik. So does he play gamelan? Does he play Japanese music? Does he play Indian music? No, he does not. But Weltmusik in Germany means crossover music. So crossover means it starts with the gamelan, then it continues with some Indian sitar playing, and then goes back to C major in Western music style. So these kind of combinations are called Weltmusik. And this is in some ideology of New Age movements in the 80s and 90s was very popular as a new idea of music development. Whether this is right or not, maybe we can see at the end of my presentation. To understand the way how Europe or European artists approached the region here or how they reacted to it, we can go back into the late 19th century in this case. And there was in Europe a very strong tendency of composers who tried to refer more to local music traditions. Like in Russia, Borodin, Mussorgsky, or in the north, Edvard Grieg, Niels Gade, and so on. You could name a lot of composers, Albéniz in France, and Granados, no, sorry, in Spain. Granados in Spain. And that happened, I think, because they all tried to find some more personal, individual approach to music because of the dominance of the Central Europe music at that time. And one event which is normally always connected with this development, with this interest in more local music tradition, and even with tendencies in world music or the musics of the world, was this famous world exhibition in Paris in 1889. And it's a very interesting thing that at time when you read the critics of this world exhibition, and for example the French critic Tirso, still they were open to this new music, like to Indonesian music, but then he starts to speak about that music in a very cramped way about tonic and dominant in Javanese gamelan. So it's still a tendency, they just put their own knowledge and transferred it to the new music, which in a certain way is understandable. And this was also the time when this term Weltmusik was created by a German musicologist called Georg Kapellen. It was in 1906 that he wrote something very interesting. So we are in the same period more or less than you are. Yeah? This is when the opening happens. And he wrote, an unprejudiced study of the new music literature may create doubts in regard to the limitlessness of European melody, tonality and rhythm. Yearningly, we are looking for new forms of expression, for new sources from which our imagination may be nourished again. It is compulsory to reinforce our inventiveness, which currently is lying in complete agony. So I don't discuss whether he's right or not. It's just that what he wrote. You can get it later digitally. And then later he wrote he was looking for a mixed style which is not European nor exotic. A mixed style that takes care of the exotic features as much as possible, but without leaving the European fundaments. By this marriage of the Orient and the Occident, we made marriage. So you see, it's always like that. There's the, I don't say women and men, yeah, but it's obvious. We may achieve a new exotic music style, a world music, Weltmusik, that will always shine in various nuances depending on the national and individual character of the creator. And so the term exotic was actually not new in Europe, and there have been a lot of tendencies in the Baroque time where composers referred to Turkish music, for example, but it was more in a kind of pastiche or just to show something really exotic. That was just the idea of presenting that. But Kapellen actually tries to give a new picture on this issue with his statement, and that it reminds me a very funny critical statement by my colleague Helmut Lachenmann, who in a discussion about these issues once said, it's the European composers need new Asian fresh meat. And that's a typical Lachenmann statement. But still it was in this kind of unbalanced proportion. And I remember I read in another book by Guido Adler, very famous musicologist, historian in Europe. He wrote, in spite of all changes, Guido Adler's firm statement of the natural lead of Western music culture in the world still played a role at that time. So there was always the dominance of Western music, but put in some new spices. Like in the kitchen, you have now French cooks who use some curcuma or they use some lemongrass, and to improve their ideas because they don't have any more with the European stuff. No, there are also others, I know. I think, and in regard to these new developments, normally, especially in regard to Indonesia, Claude Debussy is mentioned. And you read in 10 music theory books that Debussy created his music on the influence of Javanese, sometimes the Red Balinese music even. And so I was interested whether it's really like that. Because as a composer who also has lived a long time there, I always felt, you experience these new musics, but ultimately you are on yourself. And I think Debussy was as well. Yeah? So there's this famous piece, the Premier Arabesque. Almost every pianist has played that. And this piece has been composed in 1888. So 1 year before the, now play it, for the exhibition. Fade out. Thank you. So, I think in this piece you can find everything which is normally connected with the influence of Javanese gamelan. And if you write it in a slightly different way, you became aware of that. Sorry. Oh, no. So, okay. It's just that line that is interesting for me here. First, you have the main melody, which is this pentatonic arabesque. So the arabesque style itself is typical for gamelan ornaments, and the fact that it's pentatonic is also quite obvious here in the melody. It's a completely pentatonic melody which Debussy is using. So, first thing. And the second thing is, if you go to gamelan, you know you have the core melody, the low instruments, you have the bonang, and in the middle region with this more or less ornamental style, and you have an upper melody. And this is exactly, if you write it in a slightly different way, you will see here you have the core melody in the left hand, you have this middle section of ornamentation, and you have a melody line on top, which is in a way also hidden in this ornamental line. So that what the Javanese call balungan, in a way you can see here in this structure. And even here, this kind of relation, augmentation and diminution of the same structure, also something quite typical for gamelan ornamentation. So this was quite interesting for me, that apparently Debussy had similar thoughts in music, which then could be also detected in gamelan music. And when he heard gamelan music for the first time, this was a kind of affirmation maybe, that, hey, here is something which is much more developed than I have thought in this direction, but he also had similar thoughts in music. And it's probably also quite interesting to know what Debussy actually heard at that time. I have done a little research on that, and it was actually a Sundanese group of 6 musicians that came from a mountain village in near Bandung, the tea where they have grown tea. And that music sounds like that. Second example, please. Quite different from Debussy's music, I think. And it's called Gong Renteng. It's a very unique form in West Java to find there. And this is more or less that what was presented at the World Exhibition. Okay, so we see this kind of connection between Debussy and gamelan is quite questionable, at least in the form like we read it in the books. A discussion about this topic would be incomplete if I would not mention also the American scene, which has made a very special development. As I said, there was this World Music Department in California, and also America was in a completely different situation as a, let's say, new founded country with influences from various sides. And there's a very nice quote from Wiley Hitchcock, a musicologist in America. He wrote about Henry Cowell, one of the most influential persons in the early 20th century. I will get back to him later. Cowell was a Californian, also in its reminder that though American composers had traditionally looked eastward across the Atlantic to Europe cultural models, they could also look westward across the Pacific to the Orient. Cowell sought to find a context of world music for that America, interesting himself in traditional and folk music of the entire world's peoples. So, and that is really what Cowell has done, not as a composer actually, or less as a composer, but he was one of the most important supporters for other composers. Like, for example, Colin McPhee, the famous musicologist and composer on Balinese music, who wrote the big book, The Music of Bali. He got the first recordings from 28 by Henry Cowell, who influenced him to go to Bali, actually. Lou Harrison, John Cage, all these people came through the support of Henry Cowell to Asian culture and music. And John Cage did the transformation in a very unique way. For example, last night you heard a little which you could think has some influence, that from this kind of percussion tradition he invented the so-called prepared piano. You need not worry, I didn't destroy the piano last night. Yeah, everything is fine. I have everything put back to normal already. Harry Partch, also a composer which I can recommend very much, who has invented his own tuning system and his own instruments. There's currently a big revival of that music. The instruments have been rebuilt in Germany, and the Musikfabrik, the contemporary music ensemble, is touring the world currently, presenting Harry Partch pieces with these newly rebuilt instruments. I can really recommend to go to a performance if just accidentally you have the chance. So the composer who most have been influenced by gamelan music was Lou Harrison. And he went even so far that he applied the musical language into his own concept. You may like it or not, but it's convincing. I once met him, and Lou Harrison really believed in universals in music, which means when he saw, I have here a quote by Paul Drescher, a close friend of him. And this says, no, it doesn't appear here. Sorry, then I have to read it. What Lou then appears to be is a kind of universalist, one who can see the potential value and applicability of a musical idea regardless of its historic or geographic origin. And that's what really happened. And he made really quite unique music with gamelan and Western instruments. And I would play you just the beginning of his concerto for gamelan, violin, and cello. And as I said, you may like it or not, but he at least took care of the scale problem. So the two string instruments had to play in the scale of the gamelan in this case, which they did very well, I think, in this example. Let me get to another composer, very controversial composer, and even the music this piece is controversial. I don't want to say, out of special reasons which you will understand later, I don't want to say anything about the piece before we listen to it. And so we listen to the first 3 minutes, and yeah, there's reason to do so. Please, the next example. So, this was a piece by German composer Karlheinz Stockhausen. Pieces from 1966, so already 50 years old. And I'm sure if I would ask you now, we don't have the time, what you have heard, most of you would say, yeah, we have heard piece of electronic music. And in a way, it's a piece of electronic music, but it's a piece of electronic music that uses about 18 different original musics, mainly from Asian cultures. And the main music which we use is Japanese gagaku music, and there's also Balinese gamelan, there is Vietnamese children's songs, etc., things that he recorded himself and partly he also got from other persons. And he writes about the idea of the piece. During the first 8 or 9 days, he produced that in Tokyo. That's so no jet lag, I'm not sure. I could not sleep, especially one vision reappeared on and on. A vision of sounds, new technical processes, formal relations, images of notation, all that was too much interwoven into each other in order to be presented as one single logic process. After all, I intended to come closer to an old dream of mine, to go a step further in the direction, not to compose my own music, but the music of the whole earth, of all countries and races. You will hear them in Telemusik, I'm sure. They all wanted to participate in the Telemusik, sometimes simultaneously and mutually penetrating. Apparently this piece includes a lot of dynamite. Because how can one judge such a composition? It's extremely difficult, and really I know this piece, I know every note in this piece already, and I have still today I have a very how do you call it? Yeah, divergent opinion about it. Yeah. So if I see it from a complete compositional standpoint, it's a fantastic piece. Yeah. Really, the way how he composed that is great. Yeah. And I could prove that in various ways, but it's not the time here to do so. But if I recall the ideology behind it, everything I feel sick. Yeah. Because it's a kind of hubris, which is Stockhausen telling here, composing the music of all people just by using musics from different cultures without without any notice of the background, of the meaning, of the semantic aspect of that music. It's just sound material, and that's what I don't like. Because then he says, I have unified the whole world and everything is great just because I have done it. So, this is in a way sometimes a problem in the approach of other music cultures. So you might say we have done the same yesterday evening, or we will probably do tonight. I think no, there's a big difference, because we don't say that we make the music of the world, that we make the music of everyone and the music of every race. We just try to bring things together and see how they merge, how they probably crash to each other, and it's just that we explore this field and try to see what can we learn from the other. That's a completely different approach. And that's why there is for me a basic difference in that what we do here, and which I really support in 100%. I wouldn't do that if I could not support it. And that what has been done by Stockhausen. However, I would like to show you now the original music, which just by chance I got by one of his sons, who years ago gave me the recordings from his father of this music. Now, first the Japanese music, gagaku. Please, could you next example? Okay, thank you. Now the next, the Balinese music. Okay, thank you. Now that's the music from the na 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 nee na nee na nee nee na na. It's Barry's dance. It's when the guy there with this hair that tries to jump around like that. So the problem is now you know these two musics, and you will now we listen again to the original piece. That's my reason, because if you know the original musics, you hear through the whole piece only the original musics. That's my experience. Yeah? Could be next example, please. It has an electronic introduction. Okay. Even that electronic sound resembles the show playing of the Japanese gakaku with these high notes. It's African music. Okay, thank you. So I think it's completely different perception if you know the originals. Yeah, and anyway, once again, for me, this approach is compositionally really admirable, but from the aesthetic approach, I think it's a disaster. Yeah? To be honest, and I can only be honest in this regard. So, and this brings me to the piece which you will hear tonight, even just a part of it, because Exotica from Maurizio Kagel is actually almost a 1 hour piece, and as we have this type of program with short parts, we can't play the whole piece, but we have worked here 10 days on one section of Exotica, and I think it was a very interesting experience. Is there anyone here from the Exotica group? No, they are all practicing. Good, hopefully. So there was this big debate, in a way caused by that piece of Stockhausen. What is politically correct in the approach of another culture? Now, this has also some maybe special German traditions. But and Maurizio Kagel, who lived in Germany, is an Argentinian composer, then composed Exotica just to demonstrate how it could be done. And in Exotica, he intentionally asks for the 6 players, and each player has to use at least 10 exotic instruments, which means instruments from other cultures, which nobody is able to play in the original way. This is compulsory. You should not be able to play it in the original way. So that means the score is written in a way that you have to arrange your part. Yeah? For example, you have a string instrument, but you use it as a percussion instrument, etc., etc. Because he thought only by that we can neutralize the local semantics of those instruments and the local musics. And by that we are, in a certain way, politically correct. I think it's a nice idea, but you may judge, you may see as tonight how you think about it. I don't want to make any prerequisites in this regard, because it's interesting. So I'm coming to the last part. This Weltmusik idea actually was developed especially in the 60s, 70s in mid-Central Europe and also in America, in connection this hybrid Weltmusik idea with the idea of connecting people, also in the term of some global unifying idea as a holistic concept, what we call the New Age philosophy. And once again, I must apologize, there was especially one German guy who was one of the main ideologists of it. He's called Joachim Ernst Behrendt. He was very famous as a jazz promoter, actually, but he started already in the 60s with his concept East meets West. And he brought together Indian musicians playing together with jazz musicians from America. He brought together Turkish musicians with jazz musicians. And also I remember that there is the Indonesian All-Stars, which he brought to Berlin, that have been 6 musicians from Indonesia, jazz musicians. And they, I knew the pianist Bubi Chen very well. He's already died, unfortunately. And when I asked him, he said, "Oh, yeah, Behrendt. Actually, we would like to we were very honored to go to Berlin to the jazz festival, but we want to play bebop." And he asked us to play Indonesian melodies. We didn't want to improvise on Indonesian melodies. We wanted to play bebop. Yeah? But that was his idea of East meets West. And Behrendt then later started to create a kind of philosophy, and I read you one text. All over the world, it is the same proportions that are the basis for the music of all societies and cultures. These proportions are signified by the universality of the overtone series. They are clear results in physics which cannot be changed by any musician of this world. Everything that deviates from these findings will be adjusted automatically by our ears. I think this is a statement with the same hubris than Stockhausen, because it says that everything else is adjusted. It does not have the idea that everything else may be done intentionally, and you should hear it in a different way. Yeah? And I think this is one of the main things. If we are talking or if we are occupied with the music of another culture, my idea is always to become very small first and to learn. Because what I know is just what I know from my background. That may be completely different from what I'm studying. So I remember when I learned Balinese gamelan, after 1 year learning, I came back to Germany and I gave lectures on Balinese gamelan. And then I was the 2nd year in Bali, and then I came back and I didn't give any lectures anymore for the next 10 years. Yeah? Because I felt, oh, that was a mistake. I have to start from scratch again. Yeah? And so I think it's a kind of, how shall I put that? We must always first acknowledge that we don't know anything about the other. And then we have to learn about it. Yeah? And this mutual learning, I think, is the most important thing for me. Yeah? And then we can go a step further. So this Behrendt, just to give you finally one funny example, he likes to find universalities, especially in language. You call that onomatopoetic, also in English, yeah, right? Same word? Good. So the German word Klang, which means sound. Yeah? This Klang, also this ang is already sounding for him. And that's why, sure, there's the Indonesian gamelan. So it's gamelan. It's not gamelang. But for him, he writes in the book gamelang. And then there's also the head, the master of sound, is the kliang. And if you read that and you don't know it, it sounds very convincing. Yeah? And the world is one. The problem is, gamelang, it's gamelan, not A-N-G, it's A-N. And klian is also A-N at the end. But the problem is also that the klian could be the head of the village. Klian could be the head of the rice harvest club. Klian could be the head of the water irrigation club, which means klian is just the name for a head of something, yeah, and has nothing to do with the music. Yeah? That's all the things which he doesn't know, or at least avoid it. I don't know. Yeah? So we see there happened a lot of things which were, according to my experience, not so correct in this way. And I would like to end with one very disappointing experience in 2000, disappointing for me, but only in terms that I think there's still a lot to do in our mutual knowledge of each other. In 2005, I curated a gamelan festival at the House of World Cultures in Berlin. And then the first group was, some of you might know that group, Kiai Fatahillah from Bandung. It's, I think it's the only gamelan group who can play perfectly with notation. And the leader and composer, Ivan Gunawan, he even writes his scores very precisely, and they play it. And I play you now a piece of that group. It's a live recording from that performance in Berlin. And then I read you afterwards the comment of the critic. Could you, the next example. Okay, thank you. So it's only, I think it's a mono system which we have here, because the voice is normally much louder that you heard. Yeah, so we didn't have the right balance at the moment. So That was one of the pieces they played, and I can tell you that it was about 600 people in the audience, and they got, for the whole program, standing ovations after that. The critic, Rudolf Ganz, who lives, by the way, in Chiang Mai, he wrote, "The skepticism towards attempts to connect Western compositional techniques with gamelan music that lives from the organic flow of the music itself seems to be even more justified after those 4 days of music. To see the poor musicians, in complete contrast to that tradition, looking to the hands of the conductor or staring into their respective parts was a complete disaster." Yeah. So I think we still have to learn a lot from each other. Thank you very much.
We'll take a coffee break for let's say 20 minutes and then we'll move